Harlem, 1947. A white teacher at an elite school makes the fatal mistake of publicly insulting Bumpy Johnson's 8-year-old daughter in front of 30 wealthy white children who explode into cruel laughter. 24 hours later, Bumpy Johnson walks into that prestigious school, St. Augustine Academy, with 3 armed men and locks the doors. For 3 hours and 40 minutes, under the terrified gaze of 1,000 white students, children of businessmen, bankers, and politicians, that teacher will be forced to write, "I am a coward," 1,000 times on the blackboard. But what happened next transformed that day into the event that would forever change educational segregation in New York City. New York, 1947. Racial segregation is at its peak. Elite schools like St. Augustine Academy, located on Manhattan's Upper East Side, exist exclusively for children of wealthy white families. Black people are prohibited not merely as students, but as teachers, administrators, or any position beyond janitor or maintenance worker. The school houses children from 47 of New York's most powerful families, owners of banks, industrial magnates, influential politicians, heirs to old fortunes. The building itself stands as a monument to white privilege, its limestone facade carved with Latin phrases about knowledge and virtue, its manicured gardens maintained by black groundskeepers who enter through separate doors and leave before wealthy parents arrive for pickup. Inside these walls, children learn mathematics and literature and history, but they also absorb something else, something never written in any curriculum but taught nonetheless through 1,000 small moments, that they are superior, that their whiteness grants them inherent worth, that black people exist in a separate category of humanity altogether. Bumpy Johnson, 42 years old, stands at the absolute height of his power in 1947. He controls illegal gambling operations throughout Harlem, employs hundreds of people, moves millions of dollars annually, and commands respect and fear in equal measure. But above everything else, above his criminal empire and his reputation and his wealth, Bumpy is a father to an 8-year-old girl named Margaret, his only daughter, the light of his life, the child he protects with absolute ferocity. Margaret is intelligent, curious, educated by Bumpy's wife, Mamie, to speak properly, read voraciously, and conduct herself with dignity in all situations. Bumpy sees in his daughter something he fights for in his criminal work, proof that black excellence exists independent of white approval, that intelligence and grace and potential belong to his community regardless of what white society believes. Professor William Hendricks, 34 years old, has taught history at St. Augustine Academy for 6 years. He comes from a traditional Boston family, graduated from Yale, believes profoundly in white supremacy and the natural inferiority of black people. He is popular among wealthy students who appreciate his lectures on civilization, classes where he teaches openly that white people built all human civilization, and that black people are biologically incapable of comparable intellectual achievement. Parents adore Hendricks because he has no fear of teaching the truth about races, their coded language for someone willing to explicitly reinforce the racial hierarchies they rely upon to maintain their privileged position. Hendricks sees himself as an educator of uncomfortable truths, a brave voice in an era of softening racial attitudes, someone preserving important distinctions that liberal elements of society are trying to erase. On Monday, April 14, 1947, Margaret Johnson asks her father if she can participate in an educational excursion to the Museum of Natural History, advertised in the newspaper, open to all children of New York between ages 7 and 10. Bumpy, proud of his daughter's intellectual curiosity, reads the advertisement carefully. It mentions nothing about race. He decides to take her personally. The next morning, Bumpy and Margaret arrive at the museum at 9 o'clock, where 120 white children from elite schools are gathered with their teachers. When they attempt to join the group, Professor Hendricks, the event organizer, physically blocks their path. This excursion is for students from appropriate schools, he says, not for people like you. Margaret, confused, asks why not, since the newspaper said all children of New York, sir. Hendricks smiles with cruelty that makes his teeth seem too white, too sharp. It said children, he tells her. It did not say animals. Bumpy holds Margaret's hand firmly, his jaw tight, and leads his daughter away in silence while some white children laugh, their laughter echoing across marble floors like breaking glass. He does not respond to Hendricks. He does not threaten. He does not raise his voice. Marcus Williams, Bumpy's closest associate who has known him for 15 years, will later say that this silence was more frightening than any explosion of rage could have been, because Bumpy Johnson silent means Bumpy Johnson thinking, and Bumpy Johnson thinking means someone has made a mistake they do not yet understand the full consequences of. That evening, Margaret sits at the kitchen table with her mother, trying to complete homework but unable to focus. She keeps returning to the same question, circling it the way a tongue returns to a broken tooth. "Why did that teacher say I am not a child?" she asks. "I am a child, am I not?" Mamie tries to explain racism in a way an 8-year-old can process, but the explanation only generates more questions. "Margaret reads better than many of those white children probably read," she says. Her mother always tells her she is intelligent. Why did he call her an animal? Bumpy, listening from the adjacent room, feels something break inside him. Not the breaking of anger, but the breaking of something deeper. The breaking of the barrier between the criminal violence he commits for business reasons and the personal violence he commits when someone threatens what he loves most. His daughter, his brilliant, curious, kind daughter, is questioning her own humanity because a white teacher treated her as less than human in public. He says nothing in that moment, but Marcus Williams, stopping by that evening, notices Bumpy making silent phone calls, the type of phone calls that usually precede something violent. If you enjoy learning more about stories from the American Mafia underworld, click the button and subscribe to our channel. On Friday, April 18, 1947, at 3:15 in the afternoon, Mamie Johnson, without knowledge of whatever Bumpy might be planning, decides to give Margaret a positive educational experience. She takes her daughter to the public library on 42nd Street. The route passes directly in front of St. Augustine Academy precisely at dismissal time. Margaret innocently points toward the school. "Mommy," she says, "that is the teacher from the museum." William Hendricks stands on the front steps supervising student departure. Approximately 30 white children from wealthy families waiting for drivers and nannies, and Margaret, not yet fully comprehending the hatred he harbors for her, waves shyly. "Hello, Mr. Teacher," she calls out. Hendricks looks at Margaret, then at Mamie, and his face contorts with contempt so pure it seems almost theatrical, as though he is performing his disgust for an audience. Loud enough for all 30 students to hear clearly, he speaks. "What audacity," he says. "That little negress really thinks she can speak to me as though she were people, as though her presence does not contaminate this entire street." The students explode into laughter, cruel laughter, genuinely amused by the humiliation of an 8-year-old child. Some point and make monkey sounds. A girl screams for Margaret to go back where she came from. Hendricks does nothing to stop them. In fact, he smiles with approval, satisfied at having taught these children an appropriate lesson about social hierarchy. Mamie, furious but controlled, takes Margaret by the hand and walks away quickly, but not quickly enough to prevent Margaret from absorbing the full weight of that moment, the public humiliation, the laughter, the casual cruelty of children who see her as less than human. That night when Mamie tells Bumpy what happened, she has never seen that expression on his face before. Not explosive anger. Something colder, more calculated, more dangerous. Bumpy simply says he will handle it. And Mamie, knowing her husband, knows that handle does not mean a lawsuit or a formal complaint. Bumpy spends the next 18 hours doing something that made him legendary in the criminal underworld. Meticulous research. He discovers that St. Augustine Academy has 1,247 students, all from extremely wealthy white families. William Hendricks teaches history to 180 students distributed across 6 classes. Hendricks is respected by parents because he teaches traditional values, code language for white supremacy. The school has never had a single black student, black teacher, or black administrator in its 73 years of history. The Board of Trustees includes 3 state senators, 2 judges, and the presidents of 2 of New York's largest banks. The school prides itself on its tradition of excellence and preservation of American values, more code language for maintaining racial exclusivity. Bumpy also discovers something crucial. Monday, April 21st, is the day of the monthly General Assembly. Every student and teacher gathered in the main auditorium at 10 o'clock in the morning. More than 1,000 people in a single location. Perfect for what Bumpy has in mind, though what exactly that might be remains unclear even to Marcus Williams when Bumpy summons him along with James Big Jim Fletcher, Raymond Cole, and Thomas Wright. Bumpy explains what happened to Margaret. He explains what he intends to do. Nobody dies, Bumpy makes clear. But that teacher, that school, those children, all of them are going to learn a lesson they will never forget about what happens when you humiliate a black child, and they are going to learn it in front of everyone, the same way they humiliated his daughter in front of everyone. Monday morning, April 21st, 1947, 9:55. Bumpy Johnson and his 4 men arrive at St. Augustine Academy, dressed in expensive suits, indistinguishable from wealthy parents arriving for an administrative meeting. Security guards at the entrance do not even question them. Well-dressed black men are assumed to be drivers or assistants to white families, invisible in their servitude, and this assumption is precisely what Bumpy counts on, the way white supremacy creates its own blind spots, the way privilege makes people careless. At 9:58, all 1,000 students sit in the auditorium, teachers lined along the sides, Professor Hendricks on stage presenting the pillars of Western civilization, his monthly lecture that glorifies European achievements while subtly diminishing contributions from other races. He speaks about Rome and Greece and the Renaissance, about how civilization flows from European genius, about how other cultures contributed labor but not intellect, and the students listen with the absorption that comes from hearing ideas that confirm what they already believe about themselves. Exactly at 10:02, Bumpy Johnson and his men enter through the center aisle. It takes 12 seconds for people to realize something is wrong. These black men are not janitors. They are walking with purpose. 3 of them hold guns discreetly under their coats, visible only if you know to look for them, and Bumpy knows that in a room of 1,000 children, panic spreads faster than fire if not carefully controlled. Bumpy walks up to the stage. Hendricks begins to protest. "How dare you?" he starts to say. But Bumpy interrupts him with a single motion, showing a .45 caliber pistol pressed against Hendricks's stomach. "Sit down and shut up," Bumpy says quietly. "You are going to listen now." He turns to face the terrified audience of 1,000 wealthy white students and 47 teachers. His voice is calm, controlled, but carries absolute weight. "Last Friday," he says, "this man, Professor William Hendricks, publicly insulted my 8-year-old daughter, called her a negress in front of 30 of you who laughed, said her presence contaminated the street, allowed students to make monkey sounds at a child who only wanted to go to the library." Absolute silence fills the auditorium. 1,000 children frozen in terror. And in that silence, Bumpy understands something important, that these children have never experienced fear like this. Real fear. The kind that makes your stomach drop and your hands shake, because their privilege has insulated them from genuine consequences their entire lives. "Today you are all going to learn a lesson about respect," Bumpy continues, "about consequences, about what happens when you humiliate a child publicly." Bumpy pulls Hendricks to the giant blackboard on stage. He hands him chalk. "Write this," he says. "I am a coward. 1,000 times. Slowly, clearly, so everyone in this room can read every word." Hendricks, trembling, stammers that Bumpy cannot do this, and Bumpy presses the gun against his ribs. "Write," he says, "or I shoot your knee right here in front of all these students, and then you write with your leg bleeding. Your choice." Hendricks begins to write. For 3 hours and 40 minutes, William Hendricks writes, "I am a coward 1,000 times" on the blackboard. His hands cramp, his fingers bleed from the rough chalk. Tears stream down his face from humiliation and exhaustion and fear. And 1,000 wealthy white students watch in absolute silence, many crying, some shaking, all terrified but unable to look away. Bumpy does not let anyone leave, does not let anyone speak. Just watch. Just witness the complete humiliation of this man who humiliated his daughter. Teachers try to intervene. Bumpy gestures to Marcus and Big Jim, who discreetly show their weapons. Nobody moves, he says. Nobody leaves. Everyone watches. At 1:42 in the afternoon, Hendricks finishes the 1,000th repetition. He collapses from exhaustion, his hands bleeding, his face covered in sweat and tears and chalk dust. And the students watching him understand something they have never understood before. That authority figures can be broken, that power is not permanent, that humiliation feels the same regardless of skin color. Though this last lesson will take many of them years to fully process. But Bumpy is not finished. Now, he says calmly, we go to the front garden. He forces Hendricks to walk out of the auditorium, through the hallways, and into the meticulously maintained front garden of the school, the pride of St. Augustine, with perfect lawns and expensive flowers. The 1,000 students follow, pushed by Marcus and the other men. They form a circle around the garden, and Raymond Cole brings a shovel from the school's maintenance shed. Bumpy hands it to Hendricks. Dig a grave, he says. 2 meters long, 1 meter wide, 1 meter deep, right here in the middle of your beautiful garden. Hendricks understands instantly. He thinks Bumpy is going to kill him, going to bury him here in front of 1,000 children. Please, he begs, please do not do this. I have a wife, children, please. My daughter is 8 years old, Bumpy says coldly. She cried for 3 nights because you made her question whether she is human. Now dig. For 40 minutes, Hendricks digs while children cry openly, some vomiting, others collapsing, all believing genuinely that they are about to witness their teacher's murder. Several teachers try to intervene. Bumpy fires a single shot into the air. Nobody moves, he says, or the next one goes into someone. When the grave is complete, 2 meters long, 1 meter deep, Bumpy forces Hendricks to stand at its edge. He points the gun at Hendricks' head. 1,000 children scream and cry, and then Bumpy lowers the gun. Look at this man, Bumpy says, his voice carrying across the silent garden. Look at this grave he dug. This is what happens when you treat another human being as less than human because of the color of their skin. You dig your own grave, you destroy your own dignity. You become exactly what you just witnessed, a man crying, begging, digging a hole that represents everything he truly is. Coward, cruel, empty. He turns to the 1,000 students. My daughter is 8 years old, he says. She loves to read, loves to learn, wants to know about the world. And last Friday, 30 of you laughed when this man called her an animal, laughed at the humiliation of a child. Today, you learned how it feels to have fear, to have humiliation, to believe something terrible will happen and be unable to do anything about it. This is what you did to my daughter. And now you understand. Bumpy throws the shovel to the ground. This grave stays here, he says. Do not fill it, leave it exactly as it is. Every day when you arrive at this school, you will see this hole and remember what happens when you treat black people as though they are not human. You will remember that humiliation has consequences. You will remember that cruelty returns to you. He addresses the school's headmaster, Dr. Patterson, who is trembling in the crowd. You have 2 choices, Bumpy says. First choice, tomorrow police come to arrest me. You press charges. And then I guarantee that every newspaper in New York will know that St. Augustine Academy allows teachers to publicly insult 8-year-old black children. Will know that this man teaches white supremacy to impressionable children. Will know that you tolerate casual cruelty against black children. Your wealthy donors will read these headlines over breakfast. Second choice, this ends here. No police, no charges. But within 30 days, this school hires 3 black teachers from Harlem, qualified, respectable teachers who will teach these students that black people are educated, intelligent, and deserving of respect. And Professor Hendricks here never works in education again. You choose. Dr. Patterson, still trembling, nods agreement. Second choice, he whispers. No police. Bumpy Johnson and his men leave St. Augustine Academy without being detained. No charges are pressed. Professor William Hendricks is quietly fired that afternoon with a letter of recommendation that says only resigned for personal reasons. He never teaches again. working the rest of his life in an accounting office in New Jersey, never speaking about what happened on April 21st, 1947. The grave in the front garden remains open for 3 weeks until the Board of Trustees orders it filled, but only after it has been photographed by journalists who somehow learned the story. The photographs are never published but circulate privately, and in certain circles in Harlem, people speak about what Bumpy Johnson did with a mixture of pride and unease, because what he did was effective but also terrifying, a demonstration that justice through violence sometimes achieves what justice through proper channels never could. On May 15, 1947, St. Augustine Academy hires 3 black teachers from Harlem: Dr. Samuel Washington, who teaches history, Professor Alice Williams, who teaches literature, and Professor George Freeman, who teaches mathematics. All 3 are highly qualified with advanced degrees, but have been consistently denied teaching positions at white schools for years. Their hiring makes headlines in black newspapers across the country as an unprecedented breakthrough in educational integration. The reactions among students are deeply divided. Approximately 200 students are withdrawn by furious parents who will not tolerate their children being taught by black people. But the 800 remaining students, many still traumatized by what they witnessed on April 21st, gradually learn under these new teachers that black people are, in fact, their intellectual equals. What Bumpy Johnson did on April 21st, 1947, was illegal, terrorizing, and violated multiple laws. It was also arguably one of the most effective acts of forced integration in New York educational history. Within 3 years, 5 other elite private schools in Manhattan hire black teachers, citing community pressure, but secretly fearing their own versions of the St. Augustine incident. The story spreads through whispered conversations, through private meetings between headmasters who discuss how to prevent similar situations, through the invisible networks that connect powerful people who suddenly understand that maintaining racial segregation might have consequences they had not previously considered. Margaret Johnson, now 84 years old in 2023, still remembers that period. "My father never told me specifically what he did," she says in an interview for an oral history project. "But I learned years later through other people. And while I understand it was violent and terrorizing for those children, I also understand he was defending not just me, but all black children who were routinely humiliated by teachers who taught that we were not human. He used terror to combat terror, used public humiliation to respond to public humiliation. And it worked. That school changed. Those students changed. Some of them, decades later, sought me out to say that day, though traumatic, taught them about the consequences of racism in ways no lecture ever could have." The grave that Professor Hendricks dug remained in the front lawn of St. Augustine Academy for only 3 weeks before being filled. But the lesson it represented, that cruelty has consequences, that humiliation returns to you, that casual racism against children can result in violent justice, that lesson remained in that school for generations. Students who were present on April 21st, 1947, told the story to their own children and grandchildren, and the story grew with each retelling until it became a legend that defined an era, a moment when someone decided that defending black dignity required equivalent terror to the terror black people experienced daily, when someone decided that if civilized means of achieving change had completely failed, then uncivilized means became necessary. That was the day Bumpy Johnson taught 1,000 wealthy white children the most important lesson of their privileged lives, that being a black child in America meant facing casual cruelty that nobody defended against until someone decided that defense required terror equivalent to the terror experienced. That was the day a dug grave became a symbol not merely of fear, but of forced change at gunpoint when change through civilized means had failed completely. That was the day Professor William Hendricks learned that humiliating Bumpy Johnson's daughter was not merely cruel, but the stupidest and most expensive mistake he would ever make. If you enjoyed our content, consider clicking the button. New exclusive stories every day.